You're looking at a chair that is 200 years old. It isn't broken, it doesn't wobble, it hasn't lost a single piece, and it never had a screw. Now think about this. The last chair you bought, how long before it started loosening? 2 years? 3? That contrast should make you angry, because it isn't an accident, it's a choice. There is a wood joint that gets stronger over time, that tightens itself with humidity, with heat, with the weight of daily use. Medieval craftsmen knew this. The Japanese built entire temples using this logic, with zero metal, and those temples are still standing after 1,000 years. 1,000 years. And somewhere between the 18th century and what we now call modern manufacturing, this technique was abandoned, replaced by screws, glue, and particle board. Why? Not because it became inferior, but because it became too expensive to produce at scale. It's much faster to assemble a shelf with screws than to master a joint that demands millimeter precision and a real understanding of wood. The industry didn't choose quality, it chose speed, and it passed the cost onto your home, your wallet, and your patience the moment that drawers start sticking after 2 winters. The joint I'm going to show you today is the mortise and tenon, and the reason it gets stronger over time comes down to a physical phenomenon most people never stop to understand about wood. It breathes. Wood expands when it absorbs moisture and contracts when it dries. A metal screw doesn't do that. So over time, the screw and the wood start working against each other, and the result is a joint that progressively loosens. The mortise and tenon, when dimensioned correctly, works with that movement. The tenon fits into the cavity, and every cycle of expansion and contraction seals the connection a little tighter. It's physics applied to woodworking. It's the kind of thing that, once you understand it, you can never look at a screw-built piece of furniture the same way again. The problem is that learning to do this joint correctly has always been hard. Not because it's impossible, but because most plans, most tutorials, most instructions out there skip exactly the most important part. They show you the result. They don't show you the exact measurements. They don't show you the correct gap between tenon and cavity. They don't show you what happens when you're off by a millimeter. So people try, waste wood, get frustrated, and go back to screws. I spent years in that cycle, trying to follow plans that looked complete but had a massive jump between step 3 and step 4, as if what to do in between was obvious. It wasn't obvious. It never is when you're at the bench with the piece in your hand and the plan just goes silent. There's a woodworking plan collection I came across, link is in the comments, with over 16,000 projects, each one built and tested before it was ever published. Not digitized sketches. Actual plans with exact cut lists, multi-angle schematics, and instructions written for the person who is still learning, not for the person who already knows. I'm not saying it's a perfect fit for everyone, but if you're tired of following plans that fall apart halfway through, it might be worth a look. Link is in the comments, but back to the joint. The mortise and tenon has variations most people have never seen. There's the through tenon, where the tenon passes completely through the piece and is visible on the other side. You can see exactly where it ends. There's the blind tenon, hidden, invisible from the outside. There's the wedged tenon, where you drive a small wooden wedge into the tip of the tenon after it's seated, locking the joint permanently. No glue, no screws, nothing. The Japanese developed versions of this joint so complex that the piece can be assembled and disassembled without any tool, like a three-dimensional puzzle where every piece only fits one way. That isn't craft, that's engineering. And what I want you to take from this video isn't just the technique, it's the mindset. When you start to understand how wood actually works, you stop fighting the material and start working with it. You realize the crack that appeared in your project wasn't bad luck. It was a wrong decision about grain orientation. You realize the drawer that won't close anymore doesn't need a new screw. It needs a millimeter of adjustment in the fit. You go from a woodworker who follows instructions to a woodworker who understands what they're doing. And that difference completely changes what you're capable of building. The 200-year-old chair I mentioned at the beginning didn't survive because someone used magic materials. It survived because someone understood wood deeply enough to use its own physics in favor of the structure. You can do the same, with the right knowledge, the right approach, and a plan that actually takes you from start to finish without leaving you lost somewhere in the middle. If this kind of content makes sense to you, hit the like button. It tells me to keep bringing techniques the furniture industry would rather you didn't know about. And if you want to see how those plans work in practice, the link is in the comments. No pressure, just go take a look and decide if it makes sense for your next build.